if you haven't filled out your events health check, I'd highly recommend that you do. So I've done mine, and what I'd recommend is before you do it is just get a bit of an idea of your budget, what main income, where your main income comes from. So we had, I don't know, there might be about 10 different things of where your income comes from, but for the Marina Run, our income basically came from 4 different sections. So I just had to put up, you know, the 60% came from ticket sales, blah, blah, blah. So before you go to do it, just have a little bit of an idea of that. And there's another question where it says, are your sponsors corporate or local business? And I'm sort of thinking now, which one's corporate, which one's local business? If you have to put them, if you're happy to separate them, good. If you put them all together, that's fine. Just put a note down the bottom. But probably they were the only 2 things that I sort of went, So if you know that budget stuff before you go in, you'll honestly be able to do that in less than 5 minutes. It really doesn't take a lot of time. There's a couple of things you can think about in it that might take a bit longer, but really, I just found it a really worthwhile exercise. So if you could do that, that's great. Again, we've got the mentoring available. So anybody interested in that, make sure that you let us know so that we can, so we can get you booked in. Mackay Marina Run, we had our session with Krista. Thank you very much. The other day, we had 3 of our committee on, and we just found it so valuable because we wanted to do a bit of a campaign now around when the time our Marina Run was on to engage our local community and that 400-kilometre drive market. So we sort of created what we bandied around a few things, and we've sort of come up with some actions that we need to do that are very, very cost effective or no cost, because, you know, you don't sort of have a whole lot of extra money to spend. So highly recommend you get your hour with Krista or Stu, because it's definitely worthwhile. Again, we'd like to thank Local Buying Foundation for the funding available through their Big Futures funding. There we go, Local Buying Foundation, and Mackay Regional Council. They've been very generous in funding this series. Oh, and Mackay Tourism, they throw some money in too. Funding this series, it's proving really valuable for everybody. So I would like to begin by respectfully acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet today, the Ubara and Yubara people. I pay my respects to elders past and present and to the young emerging leaders. I would also like to extend my acknowledgement to all Aboriginal members of the Bira Gubba Nation. Okay, thank you, Krista. Take it away.
Awesome, great. Thanks, Chrissy. And thanks again to Mackay Regional Council and also Local Buying Foundation, not to mention Mackay Tourism for coordinating and getting the funding for us to do this. Many of you online today may have already come to a grant writing workshop before. So often these workshops go for up to 3 hours, but we know we are going to drive each other crazy if we do that. If you've got your sound on, if you don't mind just muting it, and you can turn off your video if you want to as well, just in case you need to take any urgent calls. What we're going to do today, we've got an hour and a half. So what I'm going to try and do is leave at least 20 minutes at the end for questions. I've got some co-hosts, Lasara and Chrissy, today helping. So if you've got questions throughout the program, just type them into the chat box, and then we'll try and get onto it and put everyone's voice back on just after 12. So I might need to skip through quite a lot of the content today, but I've kept the presentation in PDF, so you can go back to it and get some more detail. So if you're new to the workshop, today is about grant writing, and I do a little bit of myth busting at the beginning and then some trade secrets and what has worked for me in the past. For those of you who I don't know, I'm not what you'd call a professional grant writer. It's not my full-time job, but like many of us, I used to volunteer with a lot of festivals and events, and often I would get voted when I wasn't at the meeting to write the grants. So a lot of what I'll be sharing today is what not to do, or what I learned not to do, and some helpful hints. Okay, so to get started, I'll just wanted to share with you when my first grant I wrote was back in 1993, and we was quite successful at the very beginning in getting our grants, but suddenly after a few years we weren't getting them as much anymore, and I really felt I'd hit a brick wall, and it took me almost a decade to really get it. And I'm not saying it'll take people that long, and I know a lot of people in the audience today are quite successful with grants already. But just some of the myths that I had, or long held beliefs, I guess, in the grants field. Myth number one was the government is giving out free money. And even particularly in this day and age, in the last couple of months, there are a lot of, I guess, opportunities out there. But remember that that is a long held belief I did have, whether it's local government or state government or federal government. Myth number two, I pay lots of tax, or I'm a local ratepayer to council. I have in the back of my head that they owe me. Myth number three, and I've told people before this, I've still got scars on the top of my head from hitting it against a brick wall. Someone's going to help pay for our operational costs. So for years I thought, we're all volunteers, we're working so hard, we've just got to get someone to pay for running this event. Myth number four, they're a multinational or a big government department with lots of money. Myth number five, my project or my event is important and unique. In the world of grants and sponsorship, they are all myths. Doesn't mean that they're not true, but they are long-held beliefs that really don't help you when you're applying for grants. Everyone thinks that their project and their event is important and unique. And I'll restate, why would someone pay to run your organisation? The hardest thing to learn is that no one owes you anything, and there's no such thing as free money. No matter whether they're a grant or a sponsor, they will need a return on investment. So in today's day and age, if you're a small business running an event, obviously the return on investment for government at the moment is to make sure that you're still running. And definitely for any of our events, whether you're non-profit or profit making, most grant providers are there because they want to ensure that our events are still running into the future through these hard times. I'll give you some hints. So hint number one in the trade secret is to think of your grant application as an investment perspective with real measurable outcomes. Often when I'm writing, I used to write more about the objectives of our event or our festival, but I found that even though you might need to state those, the grant provider is more interested in what outcomes you're going to supply for the fund or the sponsorship that you're going to get, and how are you going to measure those outcomes. So start thinking of it not as a thick investment prospectus, but think return on investment. What are we going to give back to get this funding? If we were in a large face-to-face workshop in one room, I would ask people this question about what is the most common reason a grant application is rejected. And often people talk about, oh, we weren't eligible, we may have written the wrong things in our grant, maybe we applied for the wrong things in our budget, and they all are all very true. But the number one reason most grants are rejected is that there's too many applications and not enough money. And boy, oh boy, is that true right now. I used to think a lot of the grant providers were just trying to fob me off when I'd ring them and say, oh, why didn't we get it? But when I've met with them, a lot of them explain each year more people apply for grants and the pie of funds is not growing at the same rate that the number of applications is. So just keep that in the back of your mind. And that's why you need your grant application to stand out. And that's why for sponsorship as well, you really need to stand out. So I'll give you some hints on how to do that. The second trade secret, other than the investment prospectus and return on investment, is to think of your grant application as a job application. The process for going through grants is very similar to applying for a job. You've got to think, why is your business, or why is your organisation or committee the best group for the job? So just think of that when you're writing. I remember, and just going back to that, when you are applying, don't think that the grant provider knows who you are, or I guess who the committee is. So always try and put attachments in your application about not pages of CVs, but a summary of who the team is, what your qualifications are, how many years experience you have with this, and also write down if you've been successful with attracting grants before and successfully acquitting them. That's a really important way, or a great way of showing that you've been really successful with grant applications in the past, because events and festivals are a high risk investment for any government or public funding. So just think about how can you show that your group or your organisation are the best people for the job. Okay, I do share this story. I went to a grant application quite a few years ago in town, or a grant workshop quite a few years ago in Townsville. And a guy who was from the RACQ Foundation was there, and I was very excited because I thought, oh, great, I want to apply for funds. He got up and said that he received 385 requests in the last year. And then he asked how many were rejected. Only 2 of the applications were accepted, and I was gobsmacked. But it really helped me. I guess it switched. It was a light bulb moment for me. I couldn't believe that RACQ Foundation, being a big statewide, big organisation, only accepted 2 grants. And it really, we were all really shocked, and we asked why. And the grant provider, when he spoke, he said, look, many of the applicants had very worthy causes, but they had a poor fit with our objectives. He then went on to say something that really peed me off, but I'm so glad he said it, because he was honest, and he made me again understand that the myths that I was holding in my head. He said he didn't want to hear about someone else's projects or your objectives. He just wanted to know how your event or how the project you're applying for fits with my needs. And I thought, okay, I'm not thinking right here. I was always thinking how important we are, or not important, but how important the festival and event is for our community, why it's so important we go ahead. And hearing those words for him, at first I thought he was very arrogant, but he wasn't arrogant, he was honest. And it really has helped me over the years, starting to change the way I'm writing and thinking when I do an application. So if you only take one thing out of today, the most important trade secret I can share is this one. In the world of grants and sponsorship, it's not about you, it's about them. How are you delivering a return on investment for them? It doesn't necessarily have to be cash return on investment. And how is your project that you're applying for meeting their needs? And does it align with the grant program that they've got? What do they want, and what are you offering them? That's the perspective. And once you get that right, and many of you hopefully already have, but once you get that thinking right, then I noticed I was much more successful with the applications we were doing. I'll just reiterate, no one's likely to pay for the running costs of your event. Very few, very, very few grants, particularly public funds, pay for things like admin, travel, running of events. But they may assist with new innovative projects. So my advice here would to be break up your event, or break up hopefully through your business plan, which we'll cover in one of the last workshops we do in this series, is thinking about what are the priorities you need for your event, what are the projects you need to do throughout the program, and how can you break them into phases with measurable outcomes, timing and budgets. And then if grants get announced, you can identify which project is most applicable to that specific grant. I mean, it just kind of makes sense. If you need infrastructure for your event, you wouldn't apply to Tourism Events Queensland program because they don't pay for built infrastructure. If you need marketing to help attract visitors to your event, then that program is relevant. So it's really understanding what do you need, what can you apply for, and what can your event deliver through a project to help the funding provider with their objectives. So we talked when we did the action plan in our first webinar and again last week about talking about your trends and your stats. So thinking about, are you grant ready? Just remember, if you haven't already done this table, please do it. So remember, we ran over, if you hadn't joined any of our previous webinars, get this one-page form, which has been shared with you on the website by Mackay Regional Council. It's just an example of a template. You can do this in Excel or Word, and really breaking up all the stats with how many competitors or performers you have, how many people you get, how many volunteers, what's your income, expenditure, surplus or loss, and whether you report on a financial or annual year. The reason you want these stats is they really help you over time with your grant applications, because you can actually then produce real stats to put in your application. Okay, so, and then have a think again about why you were created as an event, or why do you exist? The whole reason for this is to think about why are we here for? And one example from the first applications I first did was for an Italian festival in North Queensland. We were saying and applying for tourism grants because we thought we were created, I guess, to bring visitors to our town. But the core purpose of the event was actually to celebrate our Italian culture. And by that, by doing a great celebration, one of the benefits is that we attracted visitors. So the reason we were created really helped us fine-tune about how to focus for our grant search and find new funding. So really understand why you were created, and then why do you exist? So just going back to then, why were you created? For this festival, it was to celebrate our Italian culture. That's why we were created. And then we existed to bring more visitors to town. And hopefully this will make sense in a minute. So if you can do that first, and then make sure you are eligible to apply to the grant. So when Chrissy mentioned that survey to fill out for this grant for the webinar series, when you need to establish are you eligible to apply, you really need to understand the corporate structure of your event, whether you're a registered charity, are you a non-profit incorporated association, are you a private company with non-profit objectives, are you a partnership, are you a sole trader? So you need to make sure if you're eligible to apply. And this is a great opportunity at this time, as soon as the grant is announced, to ring the grant provider and actually, after you've read about the grant program online, please ring them and say, hi, this is Jo from Mackay region. I'm just letting you know about our great festival we've got coming up next year. We've read about your grant application. I see that these type of bodies can apply, just confirming that our organisation would be eligible. And then it helps open that dialogue and relationship with the grant provider. If possible, try and see them in person. This is not always possible, particularly in this time, but can you set up a Zoom meeting with them? or just say, you know, could we catch up for coffee over Zoom? And when we can all meet again, see if you can do it face to face, just to get that rapport going with the grant provider. And it's not to, I guess, beg for money. It's really to understand and get them to tell you more about their grant program and why they run it, that type of thing. Okay, so let's touch on some of the do's and don'ts of the actual writing. A lot of people, particularly those that are new to grant writing, do get worried about whether their skills in writing are good enough. My main perspective, as long as you've got your right attitude, you know, what can we offer them? What's the best? How can we give return on investment? Some of the do's and don'ts of writing are important, but don't get hung up. As long as you are writing your application first, I write mine on a Word document so I can put spell check through it. And I'll give you some hints now on those do's and don'ts. Some of the trade secrets, a lot of the grants these days don't necessarily ask for a letter of support, but they will ask sometimes for referees. So I will always ring my referee first and just let them know we're applying for this particular grant, and could they either be a referee or provide a draft letter or supply a letter of support. If you do have to do letters of support, draft the letter for them. When you're trying to look at letters of support or identifying other partners as referees, I always ask them, would they be able to identify at least cash and or in kind support in that letter, so that when it comes to doing your budget, you can identify what co-funding you have for your program and your project. This is really important. It does take a little bit of time in the, I guess, the beginning stages, but it's a great opportunity when you're actually writing your application about identifying the committed cash and or in kind support you have for your project. This speaks volume when you're assessing grants. The other thing I like to do, if it's a large application, like anything maybe over $10,000, I put together a little one-page flyer just on an A4 Word document or PDF with some pictures, just a brief outline of what the project is. And then I email that to people and even the grant provider and potential people I maybe help to lobby, or government representatives or elected representatives. I'll also, and I wouldn't do this for small applications, but if you've got a really large application, not that it's newsworthy that you're applying for a grant, but maybe the project that you're doing to apply for the grant, if you're doing something innovative with your event, particularly during this time, why not turn that into a bit of a media release and just weave into that? And we're applying for funding right now and looking for not necessarily sponsors, but potential partners. It's a great way to start getting media PR around your project. This is just a tourism example that we did many years ago for Port Arthur, but I just wanted to give you an idea. You can get a designer to do this up for you or do it yourself. And then we added in
this week, but
document. If someone just wants to put their thing on silent, so I don't know if Chrissy or Lasara, you're there able to put their thing. So what I did here, sorry for my terrible drawing, I did a text box, hopefully yours isn't that childish, on this Word document. And I added a quick description in here about what our project was about, our objectives. And so if people were really busy and they didn't have time to speak to me, I said, no worries, I'll just send you a one-pager on our project and what we're applying for funding. So that gives you a bit of an idea there. The other thing is, a lot of grants ask in the first 10, in one of the first questions, they said, you know, please describe your project, or describe in 10 or 100 words or less the project you're applying for. This part is really important, and I often write the answer or revisit the answer to this question at the end of my application. The reason is quite a few grant providers have told me they can tell within the first question or the answer of the first question, whether they think the person or the body is going to be get across the line. And I said, how do you know that quickly? And they said, well, they need to clearly articulate what the project is and how it aligns with our grant objectives. And so I went, oh, okay. So this one, to help stand out, the first time I wrote it, I talked about this here. We are applying for the development of wharf infrastructure for Port Arthur. Now, the problem with that's factual, but it doesn't really identify how it fits with the objectives of the fund. So when I read the background on the guidelines of this particular application, one of the objectives of the application was actually to look at improving global cruise market access. Now, I don't think this grant will be around this year, but we then changed, instead of writing this, we changed the project and called it a name, Anchor at Port Arthur, and then we, in our 10 words, included the words of the objectives of this program. Anchor at Port Arthur, improving global market access. So it might sound like just wordsmithing, but straight away, if someone received the application, they know straight away that it aligns with the grant application, and also that it had a catchy name. So when we rang them, it helped us to stand out. Hi, we've got a project called Anchor at Port Arthur. We're wondering if we would be eligible. Could you help us? And we just asked questions from there. Now, the other thing to think about is trying to get the, I guess, the perspective of your application right. So when you're writing, have a think about what are you actually applying for. So say we're a sporting or a music event or any event at night, and you wanted to apply for, I don't know, say a sport and rec grant where they can give you lighting for your sports fields at night. Now, this may seem like an obvious one. Well, of course we're applying for lighting, but go down to the why. Think about why you're applying for lighting. You're applying for lighting perhaps because you're trying to get more people playing tennis, for instance, at night. And if you're applying for a tourism grant, maybe you're trying to improve overnight visitor expenditure. So rather than just saying, oh, we're applying for lighting, we're applying to improve or get more people participating or attending our event at night. This will in turn increase overnight visitor expenditure. To do this, we need help to improve the lighting of our event. So it's really thinking about the why. Why do you want lights? And I've seen quite a few events over the years. I was one of them, applying for tent cities or glamping tents or other infrastructure or goods or hire equipment for their event. Now, when I went in and wrote applications saying, oh, we just want a tent city or we just need more toilets, if I was the grant provider, I'd be going, oh, well, isn't that an operational cost? But if you can show that this is a new project, and by having better quality toilets or eco-friendly toilets, you're able to attract more people or people staying overnight to increase their satisfaction level and also to increase visitation and overnight visitor expenditure, then you're starting to talk real outcomes for the grant investment, rather than just being fixated on the actual, hire of, I don't know, catering equipment or whatever you're applying for. So this side of things, just go back to the reason of why do you need the tent city? If you needed a larger stage, why do you need the larger stage? It might sound obvious. We all know in our own heads why we're applying for it, but we often forget to write that in the application. So remember, if you're applying, for instance, for glamping tents, it's about increasing accommodation capacity. And the other thing to think about, which some grant providers have told me is really important for them, if you can show that the project, I'll stress the project you're applying for within your event, has potential to increase income or increase membership or visitation, which in turn increases income for you, then you're applying for, I guess, developing financial sustainability strategy. You're applying for a way to diversify your income to make you more financially sustainable in the future. So these types of wording is what most grant providers are looking for. They don't want you to be addicted to their grants. They really want to help us set up, either as private business owners or non-profit groups, to be self-sustainable. And what they would love to see, many of them, is when we're applying for a grant or a project, a grant to pay for a project in our event, that they can actually see that we're diversifying income streams for our event. Or it may be creating opportunities like a volunteer strategy or volunteer training, so that we're more sustainable with our human resourcing into the future, and our succession planning. So this diversification of income or making us more sustainable with human resourcing are two really big factors for many grants. Okay, so where do I find the grants? I don't know about you, but when I go to grant writing workshops, all I want to know is, what money can I get? So some of the obvious, what we call the usual suspects, are local, state and federal government. So thankfully, Mackay Regional Council does have funding for grants. And what we've done in the PDF today is make sure, I'll just show you with the highlighter here, that you've got here the link to the grants or the grants link that are available from Mackay Regional Council. And we've got Lasara here from Council today online. So make sure at the end of our session, if you've got specific questions for Mackay Regional Council, we've got Lasara online to help us answer them. So when you have a look onto the what I call the landing page of the grant section of the council, you'll see some of the areas of different funding areas that they have. And for those people who aren't from the footprint for Mackay Regional Council, just go to the, obviously Whitsundays or Central Highlands Council, whatever local government area you're in, to see what they have. And I will reiterate at this point, not all local government or state government, wherever you're based, necessarily give out event grants. And they don't have to. It depends on the priorities of their communities, and it changes year in, year out. So just keep that in mind. The thing that I love about council at Mackay Regional Council, they've developed a thing called a funding finder, which if you're like me, I won't call myself lazy at all, but I am very short on time. I'm sure everyone listening is too. And I can't keep abreast of all the different funds out there. So I'm just going to show you what the council has here, which I absolutely love, on the next screen, is what they call the, well, there's another events attraction fund that they have as well. But here's their funding finder. Sorry, I'll just quickly go back. Sorry, the event attraction fund, if you're into a more corporate conferencing type of event, or even sporting events, or to bring an event to Mackay Region, they even have this attraction fund. So just keep that in the back of in your mind. But what I wanted to show you now is this event finder. Oh, I love this. So they've set up with Grant Guru, one specifically for Mackay Region. And what you can do is actually go into, they have a thing called search grants, and you can type in, you can highlight whether you're a community organisation or whatever you are there. And then I've typed in, just as an example today, on events, and then do a search. So just clicking on there. They also have the latest quick list. So if there's the latest things on funding related to COVID, hopefully you're not in any disasters, but type of disaster funding, it'll update that quickly as well. So really, really handy there. So thanks to Council for that. And then when you type in events, it'll come up with all different options for you. Okay, so many of you, if you do have tourism outcomes on your event, you are probably already aware of the tourism and events, what's called the Destination Events Program. In this program, just make sure that you are having these 4 outcomes here. So they're looking, this grant, remember the grant provider is state government, so it's Queensland government. The organisation is Tourism and Events Queensland. So when they report back to Treasury about the outcomes of their organisation, they're measured on what is the economic activity you supplied to Queensland and how many external visitors did you bring. Because due to COVID, Tourism and Events Queensland has been very compassionate and recently understanding that 400k radius is so important to us, and knowing that with the borders shut at the moment, if and when we are available, I won't say if, when we are available to run our events and any mass gatherings again, they will be more understanding in what's called an intrastate market. But just remember, their main assessment when you're applying for their grants is very much economic activity that you're generating, how many overnight stays, how many people outside your local government footprint are coming. They are still very important to understand. If you went to or joined us on Stu's sustainability webinar earlier this week, he talked about how aligned is your event with local community values and how important that is. So you do have to show an important link between community outcomes and social benefits as well. So thinking of COVID issues, self-isolation, what have you, those social and community impacts are going to be a lot stronger. Just letting you know also the latest funding rounds for those. The next round closes on the 10th of July. So just make sure, 10th of June, if you are looking at applying, you really need to highlight that you're on the 10th of June there, and also that your events between January 2021 and 2022. So this event grant application you do have to apply for in advance. And it highlights, I guess, the need to, when you're thinking about grants, to have your projects ready, because often grants will be announced and you've got, sometimes they're not like TEQ where they tell you in advance. You might only have 4 weeks to apply or 3-week window. Another one which many people are probably aware of is the Gambling Community Benefit Fund. So I'm just going to quickly run through these, and there's links available there. Again, I've mentioned disaster assistance, so hopefully we don't need those, but if you are in an area, particularly in the tropics, that can be a website you can look at. If you're in sport and rec, make sure you're aware of the latest sport and rec funding from the state government. And also there's obviously Sports Australia and some of the grants and funding they have available. It's not so much for individual sporting events, but you may be able to help some of your participants or your competitors apply for those. And the same if you're in arts and music, your event organisation may not be able to apply, but you may be able to encourage some of your performers perhaps to apply to Australia Council to see if they can get funding to come and perform or develop projects at your event. Arts, even if you're not an arts event, is, I guess, quite a creative area that they don't fund events as such, but I've seen quite a lot of them fund projects that are presented at events. So just keep it aware of all the Arts Queensland programs that are out there. Through council, you've got a thing called RADIF, which is your Regional Arts Development Fund. Now, they're not going to give your organisation necessarily the grant, but they may give a grant to the artist who will perform or develop a project or creative workshops, whatever they may be, at your event, which could create, I guess, some, I won't call it free, but very cost-effective content for you, and also very a great way to support the creative performers and artists in your event. And if you're a sporting event, a food event, or anything that's not related to the arts, have a think about how wonderful the arts can make your event. I've seen some music events. I know down at Tennham Sands, south of you, near Gladstone, they've got a relatively small and new event. What is it? The Music and Arts Festival Under the Trees. And they have done magnificent eco artwork about on the entrances and all throughout their festival site. So when you're going there to listen to music, it just creates a whole new atmosphere. So it's a wonderful partnership to have a think about your event into the future. So don't write off the arts either. If you're into multicultural affairs, make sure you have a look at this program that you're probably already aware of. They do fund events. If you have a lot of, I guess, multicultural identities and cultural groups, diverse cultural groups in the wider community. This grant is actually on hold or closed at the moment, but a lot of events I know throughout regional Australia did get funding through what's called the Community Streams of Building Better Regions Fund. So keep an eye out on that if they are open again. Festivals Australia is another one, which those of you who've been in the workshop before, I laugh because this event, this fund has been called Festivals Australia Fund since the early mid-90s. And I remember when I first rang them back then, I rang and said, oh, can you help fund our festival? I've heard that you're the only festival fund around. And then the guy at the end of the phone said, oh no, haven't you read our guidelines? We don't fund festivals. And I thought, well, what? You're called Festivals Australia. And then he went on to explain that this is about a partnership and increasing community participation in and access to the arts by presenting what's called curated programs at festivals. So you can even be, I don't know, an outdoor music event, but what you could do is bring an artist up into your community, work with the community and present that work at the festival. It's a fantastic program. It's not the easiest application to fill into, but it's not rocket science here. And the other thing to have a think about when you are applying for grants is always look online, because most, particularly government grants, will identify who they've funded in the past and what projects. So it'll really help you understand what type of projects they fund. And I have seen some large events, even things like Carnival of Flowers, get funding from Festival in Australia before. They were in a drought one year with no water. So they were able to bring, I don't know, some leading artists into their community in the lead up to the event on how do they create flower beds without real flowers. And they did things like painted, recycled equipment, bikes, and even planting of, you know, bush foods that didn't require much water, all sorts of things. So I won't hone in any more on that, but again, making sure you read the guidelines before you ring the grant provider is so important. This volunteer grant has just shut in April, but usually there are federal government volunteer grants around. Some of the more unusual suspects, this is particularly applicable if you're a registered charity and non-profit groups, have a look at the Philanthropy Australia website. Look, they do charge for some of their guides, and I wouldn't pay for them, but have a look at what's called their fund seekers area, and they have really good hints also on fundraising. And this is what happens. And if you're looking at trying to make if you are a non-profit incorporated association, you may look like how could you not necessarily become a charity, but register for tax, what's called deductible gift recipients. So I've even seen some companies who set up a trust or a foundation associated with their event to help raise funds for things like this that can help train, I don't know, sports people in their events, even rodeo competitors, even musicians. Depending what your event's about and what the reason why you exist. Say you're an arts event, maybe long term through your business planning, you might set up a foundation. Anyway, I won't hone in any more on that. Just quickly, some of the other foundations, things like the Telstra Foundation, they have the Telstra Foundation, a sponsorship program and a kids fund program. So some of the larger corporations, including RACQ that I mentioned before, it's not just, you don't just apply to that corporation. They'll have sometimes a few different foundations or sponsorship programs to apply for. And don't do what I do, where I used to go like a bat out of hell and just send through my sponsorship or grant application and not understand which part of the organisation I'm applying for. Things like banks may not be highly good to attract right now, but think about the different industries that are still doing well through COVID, and think about which ones in your geographic area there are, because there are, yes, a lot of us are cash broke, and a lot of people are saying, oh, they won't have grants, but some organisations still will. So just think about taking common sense and who might have funding at the moment. The other thing to think about, if you need more searches, this is for the non-profit groups watching and listening today, is a thing called communitygrants.gov.au. So it's really good on having a look at what grants are out there. Our community is another non-profit sector assistant. They don't give out grants themselves, but they've got really good hints if you're non-profit. Just in closing, I do want to touch, if there are any business or private sector events we've got listening today, there is a great industry support resource. And if you're wondering why I'm looking behind me, I can't show you up on screen, but it's called the COVID-19 Industry Support Resource. It's put out by Business Queensland. And because there's so much information and grants coming out at the moment, I found it hard to keep track of it all. But they release an email every couple of weeks with the latest. So if you're a small business, you'll notice that there's a grant that just came out for $10,000. So it may not be applicable for a festival or an event, but if your festival and event is a corporate structure of being a small business that earns over a certain amount but is still small, you may be able to apply for that small business grant. And I know Mackay Tourism has been promoting that as well for tourism operators. You don't necessarily get lots of cash, but it'll help you pay for training, business planning, all that sort of thing. If you get stuck or you've got a committee that you want to give them a written grants guide to, and they're not great at listening to the internet, you can go onto this link that I've got here. Tourism Events Queensland just does a little bit of a guide for grants, which is handy. Arts Queensland, so if you're applying to their arts, they've also got a funding application writing toolkit, which I make sure if I'm applying for grants, I read that. And they've actually got a really good one-pager on 10 tips. There are lots of private companies that help you write grants if you need help, but they do charge. Here's one that's actually based in Rockhampton. I don't get any kickbacks on any of these, but if you do need help, I do know that company's been pretty good. Okay, so some of the do's and don'ts of writing. It's really interesting that just make sure you read the guidelines. I'm a bit, like I said, I jump too quickly into things and sometimes I don't read the detail. So just make sure you read the guidelines first. Have an open and honest relationship. Make sure your application stands out, and just reiterating what are the real life benefits and outcomes we can deliver. Where you can, trying to stand out online is really difficult. Remember that endless words are so boring. If you can insert pictures or graphs, do so. But if you're using most online applications these days, they don't allow you to do that. But some of them do allow you to attach a PDF. So this is where I'd be attaching my pictures and graphs and tables with that. And remember that template we talked about with the action plan of measurements and are you grant ready and showing some of your trends. When you're writing, what you could say is we have the best service. Rather than writing that, or we are the best event, write it something like according to our annual members survey or according to our annual visitor survey, 80% of our members or visitors rated us as good or very good. See the attached appendix for survey results. I wouldn't attach the whole survey and all the results, but I'd attach a graph and the stats behind backing up what you're saying. That's where you're going to go that extra mile. I'd also put together a bit of an action plan, even if they haven't asked for it, and attach just a one-pager. I've just started one there. It's very basic, but just so that they can see your thinking. If you were successful in the grant, how are you planning to implement that? Just quickly, if they're asking for a business plan and marketing strategy, make sure it's branded and looks like your event and professional. Don't make them massive documents, but just make them look professional and attach them to your application. This question is often asked, one of the last ones, and particularly during COVID times, it's going to come to the forefront, is this question about please explain, or how is this project or is your event or festival sustainable? They're not just talking about green. How viable are you in the long term? And most importantly, after the grant monies have gone, how will you continue to go? What's your succession planning? What's your long-term viability? So that's why I think the questions about income streams, income diversification, targeting new markets, all of this is so important. We're running out of time, so I'm not going to run into the risk management, but I've just put together an example there. And just touching on the budget, after too many applications, not enough money, the most common comment most people have given me if I haven't been successful in a grant is they've said you put ineligible items in the grant's budget application. And I go, right? And often it's because I've written it late at night or left it to the last minute. So please don't do that. But here's an example. Have a think. I often underestimate the real cost of the project because I forget to include all costs like insurance, audit fees, bank fees. Often you can't apply for those, but I'll just want to show you how to do that, and also valuing your in-kind support. Not all grants, but particularly ones that are government grants, they do really sometimes let you put what's called in-kind support into it. And so you want to make sure all of that information is captured in your grant. Most online applications have an online template to put your budget. I'll skip through this one now because we're running out of time, but it's all about evidence. So when you're doing your budget, make sure you're attaching things like audited financial statements. not just from your bookkeeper, but the proper audited financial statements, any business plans. If you're including items that are over 5,000, particularly over 10,000, I also attach 3 quotes for those items, and they need to be dated on proper letterhead with a company's ABN on it. And please, I know none of you would do this, but if it's your brother or relative, try not to get a quote from them, particularly when you're talking about government. And as I've mentioned, don't forget to put CVs, because they want to know also, I'll just highlight evidence, evidence, evidence. They don't know you, even though the person, say, if it's at council or state or federal government, they might know you personally that you're dealing with. You don't know where the application goes to or who's, I guess, marking it or assessing it. So please understand that you need to identify and show real evidence that you're trustworthy and what have you, and that you can manage money, because a lot of them won't know that many of you have really strong financial backgrounds. Here's an example of a draft budget. So as I said, with online applications, they have templates. Often in the templates, they are asking for your cash and in-kind contribution. So just for reporting for myself, I put this usually in an Excel spreadsheet. With the grant guidelines, for instance, they'll say, okay, what's the total grant you're applying for? So say I can apply for up to 22,000 for this one. When I've read the guidelines for this, they've clearly articulated that you can't apply for signage, you can't apply for a media launch, and you can't apply for any marketing or admin. However, if you're doing a new innovative project, they are costs that you will need to incur for this project. So the way I usually write it is to make sure in the column where we're applying for the grant fund, I only put the areas that are eligible to apply for. So, and this is a very simplified version. I'll put it, the amounts in there, and then the total grant that I'm applying for is 22,000. Then I'll show that we have a lot of in-kind support to identify that what we're giving or what the project that we're running has a lot of partnership, a lot of community and corporate support. So I'll put down here what our contribution is in kind. And you don't just pull these numbers out of a hat. I'll actually write next to them and in my attachments, little budget notes, 1, 2, 3, 4. And on a Word document or at the bottom of the Excel spreadsheet, just put a notation of how these figures are calculated or attach letters of support and evidence of that in-kind or cash support from my partners. Then often you add up what the total project cost is 65,000. So if I was a grant provider and looking at return on investment, I'd be thinking, oh, this is a project of 65,000. They're applying for 22,000. That's pretty good. For instance, in the Tourism and Events Destination Events program, you can actually only apply for up to 25% of your total events budget. So I've seen a lot of events apply for, it says you can apply for, I think it's up to 25,000 or 30,000 in that program, but they haven't read the fine detail of it, saying that yes, you can apply for $30,000, but that $30,000 can only represent up to 25% of your event's total budget. So just think about that. And please note a lot of online applications have a bit more detail here, but I just wanted to give an idea of cash and in-kind. And don't forget the in-kind contribution you and your committee also give, and how many hours for this particular project that you're applying for that you'll be allocating for the management of that. The other hint I want to give you is always get your application proofread by someone other than your committee. Or if you've got a proofreader in your committee, definitely get them to do it. But I try and get it read by someone else so that they can pick up acronyms or wording that they may not be familiar with. Be honest and try with your grant, particularly for public funding, for government grants, don't be too wishy-washy. You don't have to write like a tourist brochure. You really need to have a think about what are the things that you can deliver. Just be really short and simple with the wording. Finally, if you are struggling getting funding for your event, maybe it's because you're a small event, try and think about, is your need shared by other events? Particularly with the audience that Mackay Tourism's been working with, that larger footprint and partnering with Whitsundays Tourism and also the Central Highlands. Are there, I guess, could there be a marketing program or a touring of artists that covers multiple events in those areas? Maybe you could look at pooling your resources to apply for a grant so that the benefits to that grant provider are across multiple regions. So when I showed you that RACQ example where they only funded 2 bodies or 2 projects, it was because the projects that had applied for were actually delivering statewide benefits across multiple towns. So think about, is your need shared by others? This is a country example of a showgrounds where there was a group that ran working sheepdog trials event every year, and they actually had the opportunity to pitch for a statewide and national championships. However, they're a very small town north of Toowoomba, and their infrastructure at the showgrounds was not good enough to meet the requirements of attracting a state and national championships. When they contacted the state and national championships, they said, look, if you could just upgrade your showgrounds with this, this and this, we'll commit to coming in 2 years' time. So this group went to the department, the Queensland Sport and Rec, and Queensland Sport and Rec said, look, that's great indication. It's very positive, but you're a very small committee and the grant you're applying for is, 20 times as big as your annual budget. Have you thought about maybe partnering with the other sporting events that use this showgrounds and applying for the funds to upgrade the facilities, because they will also benefit as well. So it did take them a year basically of meetings and to get together, but they came up with a memorandum of understanding. They got the largest organisation who uses the showgrounds to auspice the application and apply on all of their behalf, and they set up a project management committee to share the application. So basically they had a camp draft group, a rodeo group, I think it was an agricultural show, and also these working show dogs events apply to Sport and Rec to improve the infrastructure to hold statewide championships in their local town, and they were successful. So I just wanted to share that with you. Of an example is your need shared by others, because I'll guarantee you that's what they say. So just in closing, I'll ask Chrissy and Lasara to be ready to turn now all our volumes on in a minute, all our speakers, our mics and videos. When I've asked grant providers, what do they look for in an application? Here's what they say. I asked a tourism body what they look for, and their thing, this is one from Southern Queensland Country, Peter Homan. He said, because we're a tourism body, what's our priorities? I look for what's the benefit to the community, what's the economic impact, how many visitors are they actually getting, and how's that going to grow either our arts or the profile of our destination. So that's for a tourism one, what they look for. So quite similar to a tourism and events grant. That's what they were looking for. And then I rang up Arts Queensland the other day just to see, hey, can you give me some hints? And I won't go through them, but Tanya Hall, their Executive Director of Programs at Arts Queensland, did share this, and she said I could share it with all of you today. Just some really interesting tidbits or tips that she's given. And she said this is not just for the arts. She assesses, and over her past in her career, has assessed lots of grants. And she said, please don't assume that we don't assume knowledge. Explain what you are tending to do clearly and simply, and explaining why the project that you're doing is important. So don't just say it's unique and it's the best, say why it's important. As I've mentioned, you know, talk about guidelines. And she even did this before I mentioned about outcomes. She reiterated it's about the detail of the project outcomes. And she's given you some more hints there. And she said, if there are any grey areas or missing information or anything that will confuse or not make sense to the assessor, it's likely to hurt your application no matter how good it is. So just keep that in mind. I also asked Rebecca Mantle, who's the Director of Culture, Entertainment and Destination Events at TEQ. She actually said, again, it's like a job interview. From her perspective, when she's had to assess grants for them, she said, just keep it accurate, succinct, so short and brief, not too brief, but make sure it addresses the selection criteria. And for Tourism and Events Queensland, they're really into point of difference because they're getting applications of events from all over Queensland. And I know Chrissy knows this one very well. Say for a running festival, there are running events all over Queensland that are applying. If you're a music event, there are music events all over Queensland that are applying. So if you're not successful, it doesn't mean that your event is not successful, but you really have to, they're really into ones that have a real point of difference, like nowhere else, as in like nowhere else in Queensland to attract people to Queensland. She was also big on making it sure it's presented impeccably, and by what she meant by that is making sure that your budget adds up, you've had it proofread, that sort of thing. And these were the 4 hints that I always have. Does it meet our objectives? What's the need? How will your project make a difference? How can you measure results, and can you deliver? Okay, so there's the quick rundown from me. So I might ask Chrissy and Lasara if they could turn us on. And I will confess, through that presentation, I haven't been able to read everyone's questions. So.
I don't think there was specific questions in there. People are just having little conversations. One of them is about the that funding, that $100 million of funding for the $10,000 grant. 60% of it is apparently gone already.
Ah, that's the small business one. Ooh.
Yeah. But we've been encouraging our members to get onto that one.
Yeah. Please do. It looks like a great opportunity. So straight after today, if you are a small business, just quickly go into the guidelines. I think you have to have a turnover of over 75. Yeah. And how many staff is it?
I think it's less than 19.
Yeah. So a lot of businesses can apply. So just keep an eye
out. When we were talking about the funding application that we did, when was that, Krista? 2018 or 19?
Yeah, it seems like longer than that, but it was only a couple of years ago.
And then basically the next year, like we couldn't pay Krista to do it again, but I had all of her information, and it was fabulous because I had all that there, and I just had to update everything. And then we discussed about something new. I can't tell you yet, or I'll have to kill you all. Something new that we were going to bring into the event that made it a bit different and would draw in more people. So we did get the funding, but we weren't able to do it this year because obviously our event's not on. But yeah, it just made that little bit of difference, because I went and got feedback off them as well and said, can you basically give me some feedback on my application? They said there's nothing wrong with it. It's a great application. There was just too many, pretty much. And then, you know, to see if there's something that you can find just to make your event a little bit different, which we did. So, and then we were
the project, Chrissy, I won't say anything about what it is, but the project that Mackay Marina run was adding to their event meant, like she said, it took if they're able to do it, takes their event into a much, I'd call it stratosphere, in the fact that it differentiates their running event from anyone else. And when I say it differentiates you, it can't just be a little differentiation. It needs to be a significant statewide or national significance for them, if that makes sense, without giving away any hints.
So, I mean, we did look at our event and say, do we want to change it? It's a great event for the Mackay region. We get people from the 400-kilometre drive market. Do we really want to get people from New South Wales? Like, is that the be-all and end-all of everything? But because we want to become Australia's best regional running event, then the answer is yes. Yeah.
And I'll just keep talking, and if anyone's got questions, just with the grants, the other thing I wanted to mention, like Chrissy's just said then, if you're not into attracting visitors from outside your region is not a priority for your event, then don't apply for grants where that's their objective. Like or I've done this where I've made up the project to get the grant funding, thinking, oh, this is great, we're going to get more money. But then I found that we changed the whole focus of our event, and it took us away from the primary reason we were running the event. And so and I've seen this happen. It isn't in any of the regions that are listening today, but I have seen some events add the word multicultural to their name so that they could get funding from multicultural affairs, which they were successful in doing. But then when visitors have turned up, they're like, this is not a multicultural event. Just because you've got some international food stalls and some dances, it's not really got anything to do with multicultural events. So just stay true to your focus. Don't do what I have made the mistake of and do a money grab and adapt your event to suit the funding, unless what you're trying to deliver in your event. Say if you want to grow the numbers attending your event and you think most of your participants locally, you're at capacity, then maybe you do want to attract more visitors, but just stay true to yourself, if that makes sense. Cool. So there's silence at the end of the phone.
I think this is the first time we've had a silent audience at the end.
Does that mean it was crap presentation?
No, that maybe you just covered everything. And you know, some of us have seen it before, but there's things in there that I don't even remember hearing last time, unless you've changed it since February.
I did try and change some bits so it wasn't the same regurg, but there's a lot of info in there, so yeah. The other thing is I always ask, and most events are really giving, if you approach them personally and say, hey, I've noticed that you're really successful in grants. Our community group, we've really struggled. Can you give me any hints? Most people are pretty open at sharing, which is good.
Because especially if it's like in your region, they want the region most people want the region to be successful. So, you know, the more people that might come to something else, then they might hear about your event and come back again, or come and visit. So I think we're, you know, if we all do share that information, we can sort of be looking after each other as a region, which is, I keep saying it, we just so have to look after each other, you know, in that big region that we've got at the moment, because that's where we're all our participants for the events and that are going to come from for a little while yet.
And definitely to get the region thinking strategically and knowing that nearly all of us have had to cancel or postpone or reschedule, is what are the common things that maybe we could look at as a group? And I don't know, Lysara or Chrissy, whether I'm opening a can of worms for you, but often you can ask a council or a tourism body maybe to auspice your application to either state or federal funds. So if you were, like I said, wanting to create or attract a group of performers, or that could be shared across multiple events, or marketing support or business planning support, whatever area you might need, or even hire equipment across, you know, Central Highlands events, Mackay and Whitsundays, you might be able to take one or two events from each region that are like-minded, held at a similar time, so you could do a road trip. That, I think, safer, something like Arts Council, Australia Council. I don't know about the TEQ, but I think because we are going through such strange times, partnerships, and I guess collectively you could show as a group of events how much money is lost and how much is needed by community. It may be an ideal time, when we've all been slapped over the face with the realities of this, to think innovatively about that partnership and delivery.
Yeah.
I'll just make a quick comment. One of the things we did in 2018 at the Coconut Festival, talking about this grants and one thing and another, we obviously had to get grants from somewhere. So we actually went to the Regional Arts Development Fund, and we set up a program where we bought some of the kite flyers that we would bring up to the festival up a couple of days early, and we had a kite making workshop at the different schools in the area. It was free to the schools, etc. We got some funding for that, which helped with the costs, which defrayed some of the costs from the main event. But what it also did is it built onto our event, because then we had a lot of those kids from the schools turn up on the day at the beach with their kites to fly kites. So therefore, we actually had an add-on which added to our project, as well as added to the arts and added to the awareness, and took it away from just the beach. It took the focus to a broader area. So something like that, actually, it worked. It's something that we could probably think of again in terms of the festival. The festival is to bring people together, but it doesn't have to be just at the beach. So you can bring them together outside the beach with add-on projects which enhance what we're doing, not, as you say, come up with a suggestion for somebody else, just to sort of get a bit of funding. We also had an interesting one from 2018. I actually got an email from somebody in something like Tonga or something like that, wanted to come to our festival so that they could play, because they'd seen we had the Fijian there and they wanted to come and join our festival from over in one of the Pacific Islands. So we had actually reached a fair way out of Australia.
Awesome. And I like that example, Roy, because when Stu was giving some examples on Tuesday, I know he talked about delivering events during when we are able to have events again, but if we can't do mass gatherings, breaking up the event and holding different things in different areas for smaller groups. And I've noticed with those RADA funds and through Festivals Australia as well, some people have involved other children like to develop music songs or songs for their festival. And it has helped attract a new market to their festival where they bring the kids, but the parents come. So I've seen some events increase their attendance by over 25% by just having these arts projects that incorporate new people from their community. Awesome. Does anyone else want to share, before we wrap up, any other learnings that they've had from grants, of successes or ones that were horrid failures? No? Cool.
I know with the beach horse races back in the day, I'm pretty sure we got a grant through Tourism and Events Queensland for 1 year, but there is others that we didn't. And, you know, the main thing with that was it was a wonderful, unique event. However, we really needed to work on things like the structure of the event and, you know, those sort of things, which we knew. We knew, we just didn't have enough people back then. And, you know, that's a sort of perfect event for Tourism Events Queensland to get behind. But if you don't have, you know, everything else in place, then it's a bit hard for them to back something that isn't sort of quite ready, I suppose.
True.
I think that's a perfect segue. Sorry, Chrissy, when you're talking about structures and that, don't forget to do your events health check survey.
Yeah.
So we can review where your structure's at and give you your one-on-one mentoring.
Yeah. And
Laurie,
like
I know you've done it, you're good. Ian, you've done it, you're good. The rest of you, we'll be calling you.
And like I said at the start, you know, like I did ours, and really all I needed to know at the beginning was what the main income from, what our main income was, to put it sort of in context of where our income came from, you know, whether it was ticket sales or merchandise, sponsorship. So, you know, even if you don't have access to all those numbers, you should have a fairly good idea. So give us a ballpark figure there. That will be good. But it'd be great to get those in, because there's quite a lot of other questions where, you know, you actually have to question yourself on, now what is really important here? And then I went, have you got a volunteer management plan? Well, we've got, for the Marina Run, we have volunteers and we have a checklist and we have a this and that, you know, like we do it okay. But then I thought, I don't really have a document, just say we were all to walk out, a document so somebody could just walk in and sort out our volunteers. So, and I think the other one was a community engagement document. That's sort of in my head, so I need to get that on paper. So it was just a nice little wake-up call about, oh, we do that well, but we actually, it's not recorded, and if it was sort of documented more, we'd actually do it better. So there we go.
It's obviously good practice to have all of those documents in place, but also it does help you when you're applying for things like Queensland Tourism Awards. So if you wanted to apply for your event to potentially win an award, they do ask for a lot of these different documents, especially your marketing strategies and those kind of things. So definitely worth doing.
And they just help your event run better, because it's nice and structured. And, you know, like if you just say your volunteer coordinator was to leave and somebody else come in, you can basically just hand it to them and say, this is how it is. There's the contacts list, there's the check-off list, there's the points they have to go to. Yeah, we got it a lot better, not last year, not this year because we can't have it, but the year before. But we just need to work on it, and then it'll be, yeah, easy to hand over to somebody. Okie dokie. Well, we might just thank Local Buying Foundation again, and Mackay Regional Council. Thank you, Krista. That was great. And thank you, Lasara. Lasara always organises the links for you and sends you through all that information. And Lasara's already asked you about the health check. Lasara, will you be sending out just a little survey to see how everybody, about just this particular session?
Yep, I've put the link in the chat, but I'll also send it out to everyone via email as well as the recording and the supporting documents.
That's great. It just lets us sort of work out, you know, if we're giving you the right content and that you want, how satisfied you are, and if you need to give us any comments, we love feedback.
And Chrissy, I put a little ad. I don't know if you can see it up on screen there. Where are we? Full screen. Just with what is coming up with Stu's retained.
Excellent. Yeah. retaining and attracting sponsorship. I'm really looking forward to this one. Yeah, I'm looking forward to this one. So that's on Tuesday lunchtime. So bring your lunch along, 12 till 1. We'll all have lunch together. But yeah, if you've got anybody that you know that might want to listen to that one, because I think there's probably a lot of people out there that are would like that information, just flick them, just send them the Zoom link and they can jump in and have a listen. This is just open for everybody. We want everyone to benefit from this webinar series. And then on the Friday, we'll have event marketing during and post-COVID. So that just will, after our session that we had the other day with the Marina Run, that's just, everything sort of changed a bit. So it's something that you'll definitely need to review for your event. Okay, we just might say thank you and farewell, everybody, and have a lovely weekend. Rug up tomorrow. It's going to be like 15 degrees or something up here, 16. They think it might be a record. If it hits 15, it'll be a record of a low daytime temperature.
No Hawaiian shirts tomorrow, Roy.
No. You need to be Spencer.
Always wear them, because if nothing else, at least it gives a bright aspect on whatever the weather is.
Yeah, wear it over your puffer jacket.
Have a great weekend, everyone.
Okay, see you all.
Bye.
Bye.